What's up, CrossLife kids?
This week's lesson is
God provides a wife for Isaac.
The Lord blessed Abraham, and Isaac grew older. When it was time for Isaac to be married, Abraham sent his most trusted servant to find a wife for him.
So what am I looking for? Looks, sandwich making?
He wished. The servant asked Abraham, "What should I do if the woman I choose doesn't want to come back to this land?" Abraham encouraged his servant's faith. He said, "The Lord will send an angel ahead of you to give you success." And with that, he sent his servant off to find his son a wife. When Abraham's servant reached Nahor, he rested his camels near a well outside the city. This was where the woman would come in the evening to draw water. The servant prayed, "O Lord, give me success today." He asked God for a sign to guide him to the right wife of Isaac. The servant would ask a woman for a drink. If she offered water to the camels and to the servant, he would know that she was the wife God had chosen for Isaac. Even before he finished praying, a woman named Rebekah came along and offered water to Isaac and his camel. Isaac immediately knew that this was the wife that would be chosen for Isaac. The servant ended up choosing Rebekah as Isaac's wife, and Rebekah chose to come back with the servant to Abraham's land and become Isaac's wife.
So you just saw the skit, and as we learned in the skit, Abraham was right. God provided a wife for his son. But you see, by the time Isaac needed a wife, Abraham's faith was strong because it had been tested. He believed God's promise to make his children, his descendants, as numerous as all the stars and a blessing to all the nations. That meant Isaac needed a wife to carry on so they could have children. One day, Jesus would be born into this very family, and God's promise to bless all the nations would come through him. Today, you and I, are called to believe God as well. God promised to give us everlasting life in heaven if we turn from our sin and place our trust in him. Reading these stories of Abraham's life and the ways God kept his promises can help our faith to grow, because we can see that God is faithful to keep his promises. So let's go over a few points that you can talk to your parents about. Number 1, Abraham knew, just didn't think, but he knew God would be faithful. When Abraham was old, he wanted to send a servant on a journey to find a wife for Isaac. Abraham knew, he believed, he was confident that God would provide a wife for his son. There was no doubt in Abraham's mind about that. Abraham's faith came from remembering what God had already done. He knew God could be trusted. So, is God always faithful? Talk to your family about times when they can think back in their life when God has been faithful, when God has provided a way for them when they didn't think there was any other way. A second point that we learn from this story is that Abraham's servant prayed in faith. The prayer of Abraham's servant was clear, it was specific, and it was detailed. He obviously believed God was able to hear and answer his prayer. So talk about with your family, why did the servant believe that God would answer his prayer? God loves it when you come to him and you pray with details and specific requests like the servant did. As Abraham's oldest servant, He knew that Isaac's birth had been a miracle. He knew that Abraham trusted God completely, and he had seen Abraham worship God. Perhaps he had been serving Abraham long enough to see the many wonderful things that God had done. Maybe he had even gone up the mountain with Abraham on that trip when Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. And maybe he witnessed that. He witnessed God providing a lamb. Just like Abraham, this servant trusted God because he had seen God be faithful. And the third point from today's story is that God perfectly answered the servant's prayer. What a wonderful demonstration of answered prayer. Rebecca fit the exact description that the servant had prayed to God about. And God arranged everything. Rebecca even appeared to the servant before he was finished praying. This is just as Jesus had said to his disciples, "Your Father knows what you need before you ask him." That's found in Matthew chapter 6, verse 8. So spend a few minutes with your family and talk about how faithful God has been. Think of examples in your own life when God had answered prayers. And sometimes we have to wait for those answers. And sometimes, just like the servant saw, the prayer is answered before we even finished.
See you next week, CrossLife kids.
He believed God's promise to make his children, his descendants, as numerous as all the stars.
He wished.
Get paid.
You're gonna say it with like a little.
CrossLife trick shots.
2, 1.
What's up, CrossLife kids?
This week's lesson is
God provides a wife for Abraham. No, I said Abraham.